Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
First, a word from our sponsor. The Daily Compliance News for October 7, 2022, the Sounds of Silence edition. We begin with that story from Reuters as a federal court in Washington is poised to rule on whether the Securities and Exchange Commission violated the law when it raised the bar on how investors can press for corporate reforms, a move critics say silences Main Street investors. Not surprisingly, under the corrupt Trump administration, the SEC passed a rule tightening requirements for shareholders to put forward proposals on corporate ballots. This rule is now being challenged by the DC court, rather. Next up from Bloomberg, not surprisingly, Musk's Twitter takeover has hit a snag over debt financing issue. Elon Musk wants the original terms to include language, quote, pending receipt of proceeds from debt financing, end quote, which was not in the original deal. It's put a kibosh on the current discussions, and it's going to be interesting to see where this issue leads. Next up, in a kind of a long-standing FCPA case involving Insurance Corporation of Barbados, which paid a bribe to induce a Barbados government official, Donville Innes, to award a contract. Innes appealed his money laundering conviction, saying that the money he was paid he didn't launder because he just spent it. And there was nothing wrong with that, so that while he may have accepted a bribe, he didn't engage in money laundering. Interesting approach, but of course, the Second Circuit pretty easily rejected that argument. And finally, from Brookings, a great article which says that investigative journalism is essential for Ukraine reconstruction and anti-corruption efforts going forward. Estimates of rebuilding Ukraine range from 100 million to 100 billion to 750 billion. When you think about the cost of the Marshall Plan brought forward, you can see these numbers are going to be huge. Well, Brookings believes that investigative journalism has a critical role to play in preventing corruption. This is, I think, a great piece for every anti-corruption compliance professional because it follows what the Department of Justice said in the December 2021 Biden administration statement on combating corruption, where they acknowledge the role of the Fourth Estate journalism in fighting corruption. Obviously, the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, and the Pandora Papers are clear examples of how journalists can shine the light of day and put transparency on opaque business practices. So Brookings recognizes this is a need for Ukraine going forward. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.